everybody, and welcome back to Sheboygan Stories on Housed and Unheard. I'm your host, Scott Labonte. Today's episode isn't built around a guest. It isn't built around some big flashy announcement. It's built around something that I've been sitting with since my last conversation with Jimmy. If you listen to episode 21, you heard us reconnect about a month or so after he moved in, but almost a month after he moved into his own place. Conversation was good. It was honest. He was definitely a man of few words. And I left there thinking about that. I think sometimes we expect transformation to sound dramatic. We expect big reflections, big realizations, big emotional statements. But what if real progress is quieter than that? What if stability sounds, ordinary? See, we're programmed or trained, I guess, to be addicted to big stories. We love these big before and after stories. Before there was chaos, afterwards there's clarity. Before there was the sidewalk, afterwards it was an apartment. That's not how life actually unfolds. Take a look at some of the media narratives. If you pay attention to how the homelessness is covered in the media, it usually swings pretty extreme. It's either crisis, there's tense, crime, emergency, danger, or it's redemption. Someone's getting housing, someone gets a job, reunites with family, something of that nature. And I get it. Media works in headlines. It works in contrast. But real life doesn't move in headlines. Most people aren't living in a dramatic rise or fall. They're living somewhere in the middle. They're trying to stabilize, trying to figure out paperwork, trying to manage anxiety, trying to keep a job for more than a few weeks. That doesn't quite make for a compelling 90-second segment. But it's real. And that's where most of the work happens. When we only show crisis or triumph, we erase the quiet middle. And the middle is where the change usually sticks. Take a look at our social media, maybe the highlight reels, stuff like that. Social media has trained us to expect visible progress. Before and after photos, milestone posts, big announcements. We rarely see posts the weeks where nothing dramatic has happened. And that's usually a pretty good thing. There's no eviction, no relapse, no emergency room visits, just stability. But stability doesn't photograph well. You can't take a picture of, hey, I paid my rent again this month. Can't post a selfie of, I handled my anxiety without blowing up my life. So we start to believe that if it isn't visible, it isn't meaningful. And that's simply not true. Take a look at fundraising language. We use this quite a bit with Pay It Forward or any nonprofit organization. So even a nonprofit work, and kind of tying in with that, I'll include us with that. I'll include myself. We often feel pressure to tell the most dramatic version of a story. Donors want impact. Impact sounds like transformation. He was homeless, now he's thriving. But sometimes the truth is more complicated. Sometimes it's, he was homeless, now he's housed, and he's still working through trauma. That doesn't quite feel as tidy, but it is honest. The quiet work doesn't always fit neatly in the fundraising paragraph, but that doesn't mean that it's any less valuable. In fact, it's often the hardest part. And think about these success stories. We love that phrase, success story. But success, according to who? Is success a job? Is it a car? Total independence? Or is success staying housed for 6 months after being years outside? Is success rebuilding trust with one person? Is success simply not giving up? When we define success too narrowly, we unintentionally create shame for people whose progress doesn't look so dramatic. And I think we really need to widen that definition. Because sometimes success is maintenance. Sometimes success is ordinary. Housing is often treated like the finish line, but housing isn't the finish line. It's the starting line of a completely different kind of work. And that work, yeah, it's quiet. So what does this quiet work actually look like? Well, quiet work looks like learning how to sleep indoors again. Or it looks like adjusting to silence when you're used to constant noise. It looks like figuring out how to manage bills. It looks like staring at four walls and realizing you don't actually know how to sit still yet. It's realizing the mental load doesn't disappear. Your trauma doesn't evaporate. Loneliness can actually increase, and structure has to be built from scratch. There's no ribbon cutting for that. There's no applause. Just repetition. I've seen this a lot at the day center too. People assume that if someone gets housed, that they are good now. But sometimes that's where the real emotional work begins. So, thinking back to this interview with Jimmy, with fewer words. Fewer words usually mean more. Sitting with Jimmy, I realized that he didn't need to give me a powerful monologue. The fact that he showed up, steady, present, and housed. That was the story. We need to get more comfortable with progress that doesn't perform for us. Sometimes fewer words means someone is finally just living. Not surviving, not proving, just living. So, with all of this going on, that quiet work often gets missed. How and why do we miss that quiet work? Well, I think we miss it because it doesn't move us emotionally in the same way that crisis does. Crisis demands attention. Stability generally whispers. If you followed this podcast, if you listened to most of the episodes, or even some of them, and you listened a couple back, I did one on parallels between education or special education and homelessness. And kind of a maintenance versus milestone type thing. I see this a lot in education. We celebrate the milestones. Kids reading at grade level, graduating, meeting an IEP goal. And those are important. But what people don't always see is the maintenance, the daily supports, the repetition, the check-ins, the reteaching. Sometimes the real victory isn't a new milestone. It's maintaining stability. It's not regressing. It's holding steady. And holding steady can take more work than people realize. And that's true in housing too. Staying housed is its own milestone, even if it doesn't look that dramatic. Another example could be, nonprofit work. There's often pressure to show measurable impact, numbers served, outcomes achieved, success rates. But what about the days when someone just comes in, sits down, and they don't spiral? What about the weeks when there's no crisis? It's not flashy, doesn't always fit into a report, but that is stability, and stability is progress. Even parenting. Parenting teaches this as well. The big moments stand out, first steps, first words, graduations. But most of parenting is maintenance. It's routines, it's boundaries, it's showing up, it's repeating yourself. It's keeping things steady so growth has room to happen. And you don't get applause for that. But that's where the real work is. Anybody that knows us or follows us, Kathleen and I, that we're raising Madeline. And raising Madeline has shown this to me in a little deeper way, I think. There have been big moments, sure. But most of what matters has been the quiet consistency. Doctor's appointments, therapies, adjustments, and a whole lot of patience. Sometimes success wasn't about moving forward dramatically. It was about holding ground. It was about creating enough stability that growth could happen at its own pace. So, maintenance isn't flashy, but maintenance is where life happens. It is where trust is rebuilt. It is where habits are formed. and it is where healing has time to settle in. We just don't always stop to recognize that. So if you're listening and you care about this issue, and I know many of you do, and I really appreciate that you followed our journey, good, bad, and otherwise everything that's happened in between, I want you to understand something. Not every story ends in a dramatic turnaround. Sometimes success is no police contact this week. Your rent is paid on time. Showing up to an appointment. Staying sober another day. And simply not giving up. And that is enough. That's the quiet work that deserves respect. So this episode doesn't have a big reveal. It's reflective. It's steady. And maybe that's fitting. Because the people we talk about on this podcast aren't characters in some big story. They're human beings doing the quiet work every single day. And if you've ever done quiet work in your own life, rebuilding, healing, stabilizing, you know it rarely comes with applause. But it still matters. Thank you for listening. If this podcast made you think differently about progress, share it. Follow the podcast on whatever platform you listen on. And as always, keep your heart open and pay it forward.